Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
Today, we are going to be talking about the past week and the awesomeness that this week was. And, of course, Kamala Harris.
Yeah. And to pause. Make sure we say it right.
Oh. Kamala.
It's like Kamala. That's all you have to think about now.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
Episode 27, Blocked and Kamala Harris. And yes, we may or may not have watched Maya Rudolph's portrayal of
Kamala. It's like Kamala.
Prior to recording this episode.
If you haven't seen it, see it. It's pure art.
Yeah, but like not just that one, like all of them.
I mean, Maya Rudolph gives life to Kamala Harris, but Kamala Harris is life. Oh, yeah. So good.
Oh my gosh. So, before we get to her, I want to talk about this past week in public schools.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how are you dealing? How do you watch the inauguration? Is that a thing?
So, that is the question.
Oh, really?
So, past inaugurations, like any political major event, the question that every social studies teacher has to ask themselves is, do I turn on the television?
Yeah.
Right? Or
in
my case, do I stream, C-SPAN or CBS or whatever?
What's your go-to station if you get a chance to
So it was interesting. My colleague and I were streaming different things in our rooms.
Okay.
He was streaming C-SPAN because he didn't want the commentary. He wanted the non-biased, here's just what's happening,
Clever.
And I appreciated that. And I think he was right when he said that. I was like, I should have played C-SPAN.
Sometimes, but C-SPAN doesn't give you everything.
Yeah.
And you miss a lot because they don't have multiple cameras.
Right. And sometimes they don't tell you who people are,
Right. You're kind of out there guessing.
Yeah.
You're kind of making up your own mind about the day, which doesn't always help you.
So I use CBS, not because I'm partial to CBS at all, but because they have free live stream of news forever. CNN and others eventually make you pay. Well, so this week I was in a Zoom call with some other social studies teachers around the state.
Yeah.
And Franklin High School was not allowed
What?
to show the inauguration. So called out Franklin High School. Social studies teachers in that school were given a directive from the top that you are not allowed to talk about this.
From who?
Miles away from their principal. And they are told they're not allowed to talk about it in their classrooms.
What?
So just a few miles away down the road where I teach, my principal in the morning of the inauguration.
Is that a thing? Are schools really allowed to directive?
They are allowed to ban stuff. Plymouth High School here in town banned the talking about the debates this past fall. The principal in a staff meeting said, the debates are happening tonight. You are not allowed to talk about them tomorrow in your school. I'm sorry, but that is social studies. My principal in my...
but that's also oh my gosh, that's not... you have no law saying that that's what you should be doing.
Well,
this is historical things are happening.
They are allowed to limit our free speech in schools.
How? How's that?
There's a million case trials, and that's why teachers have tenure to protect their speech in
Thankfully,
schools
you guys
to
are
some
unionized.
extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when it comes to these things, the question that I always ask is, if we are not teaching them how to talk about difficult subjects,
where are they going to learn?
Who is teaching them how to talk about difficult subjects? Because
you're not sitting there saying one side or the other. I imagine you're pretty unbiased when you're trying to give your deliverance of the what's happening.
Yeah.
Like many history teachers. I grew up with history teachers that would never tell you their political side. And I think that it maybe is a good sign of a history teacher, but it kept it really fair. It was very fair practice in a classroom where anyone with any opinion was allowed to give it.
Mm-hmm. I also want my kids to be educated on the whole political spectrum. And so I do think that my students are armed to figure out my political leanings.
I'm sure that they could deep into it.
Because I want them to know, like, I want them to know data on political science. I want them to know that women more than men vote Democrat.
Yep.
Right? So they could just, off the bat...
women more than men have voted in most elections.
Right.
It's like, that's a thing.
New Englanders tend to vote Democrat more than other people.
Yep.
So my students could just take the raw data and figure it out. But the last 4 years as social studies teachers has been very trying.
Oh,
because of the incumbent president. And
because the guy coming after your jobs, I mean, didn't he enact trying to make tiny patriots a thing?
Yes. So this has been a very difficult time to be a social studies teacher because you have to be neutral on in issues where it's impossible to be neutral. It's okay, I apparently don't care about
human rights.
I'm not really sure. So it's been a very challenging.
Are you Muslim in my classroom? Sorry, bye. Are you Mexican in my classroom? Yeah, bye.
I hope that you're not an immigrant. It's just
really
awful. So it's been very trying, but I think many teachers around the country have been walking whatever line they know to balance the political situation in their lives.
Exactly. But more recently, I was talking to a couple different career coaches that I network with, and we get together on Wednesdays and we call ourselves the HR disruptors, but more teachers than ever have reached out to us that they're changing careers.
Yeah.
It is by far the number one people that are reaching out and saying, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Whether it's pandemic related or election and political
and
related.
How to do this.
But it's definitely, I've never had teachers reach out and say, I'm not interested in this career anymore.
Right. Well, it is in my school, the directive, we were given an email from our principal, but the email said, this is a historic moment. And I'm not even just talking about Kamala Harris. We've got the oldest president in American history being elected for the first, that's incredible.
First term.
We got the second man ever in American history.
Ever. He's Jewish.
We have the first lady to not only pledge to keep her day job, as a teacher, mind you, but also she has a doctorate, which is the highest.
She's more educated than her husband.
Right, but she's also the highest educated first lady in American history ever. So the list of things.
And she's a stepmom. And Kamala Harris, stepmom. So you have all these family dynamics, too, coming into play that have never really been in office before.
Forget all the stuff about her being the first woman, the first person of color, not just woman of color, person of color in the vice president. So my principal's email to us was, if you want to show it, show it. It's up to you. Great. We're professional educators, fun fact. In my school, the majority of us have master's degrees or doctorate degrees.
I just don't even email me. I'm gonna do it anyway.
Right. But he did email it and he said, if you want to show it, show it. But I'd like you to frame it in the sense that it is a historic moment and we are going to watch it. And I appreciate the permission to do that. But I think you're right. We should be allowed discretion about framing this to fit our curriculum, right? To fit our curriculum. But this is also this is history. And in social studies, we are going to watch it and talk about it. And,
Which you should. It's a presidential election. It's inauguration day.
Yeah.
We should all have, we should have the day off from school and work so that we can participate in a national event. Same with election day. Everyone should have the day off. These are my feelings about things. But
thank you for your feelings.
I'm here for both of them. And, very nice of your principal to even make a comment, but also unnecessary. I feel for those schools that are not allowed to talk about it.
So I was curious
when
I
heard
doing? When my colleague from Franklin told me that had happened. I said, first of all, what?
Yeah,
And then second of all, I wonder how widespread that is. So this is not a scientific poll by any means, but I polled our Instagram followers.
Oh, yeah. I saw the note.
Yeah. So 80-20. So 80% of our followers or of the people that responded from our followers were allowed to show it, and 20%, so a vast minority, were not allowed to show it. But here are some of so Franklin High School, that's that story. This is what one person said, Stephanie. She said, we also immediately got a district-wide message from the superintendent.
Whoa.
Okay, telling us not to wear anything political to work, express any political views, opinions, or discuss politics with our students. And she goes, I'm a civics teacher, so guiding students' political discussions is kind of my thing. And I was just like, I know.
What?
But it drives me nuts because it's like, I went to 6 years of college education.
If you think I'm not qualified to have a discussion thoughtfully with my students around politics, then what the fuck am I doing in my job?
Right, like fire me. Like if you
I'm obviously not doing my job.
Right, like if you don't think I can do this, why am I here? If you trust me to teach the Emancipation Proclamation but not the 2021 inauguration,
it's interesting in the fact that like in a private sector, in corporations, there's not a directive from the top by any means from people saying like don't talk about politics. But there definitely is a message that's being sent from a lot of public organizations that are basically like, politics do not have a space in our workplace. And if you decide to bring politics into the workspace, there are repercussions.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's a very interesting thing that we've been dealing with, not in my own organization, but in many others that I've heard from. And it's been really interesting how people are dealing with it, because you'll have, manufacturing companies that are pro whatever, and then you'll have, tech firms that are pro this. And there's two sides to every coin. There's going to be people that sit on every side of the fence. And how do you operate a business with people that disagree significantly? This is probably the largest divide, I would imagine, in politics. At least the most outspoken.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I guess I haven't lived long enough to understand that, but like in my lifetime, this is the most divided I've ever seen people.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that creates a lot of dynamics in the workforce.
It is definitely very divided, and it's definitely the most divided it's ever been in our lifetime. But there are definitely times in American history when we have been more divided.
Okay. And,
but we are, if things continue on the trend that they are going, like
it's scary.
Yeah, it's scary. But a lot of people that I reached out to who said that they were not allowed to show it, when I pressed a little bit, so I had qualitative conversations with people in addition to the poll, and multiple people mentioned fear of repercussions, which is what you're talking about. And they were basically like, I have had many situations in my district where I didn't
broached a subject that wasn't
and
popular.
the administration did not have my back, and I just have given up bringing up controversial things. And then on the other side of it was multiple people said, I just live in a really conservative area, and I thought that I would get flack if I showed it. And I live in a really conservative area. I teach in a really conservative school. And you know what? I showed when Trump was inaugurated. And I showed, it shouldn't matter who's being inaugurated. This is a major national moment. And it doesn't need to derail your day. And like many of my classes weren't even happening at the time.
It's showing history.
Yeah, it's like this is happening right now. And especially, and more than Trump, especially this one. I mean, Melania Trump being the first immigrant woman.
First lady. Was a big deal.
That's a huge deal. But this one is more because of all the other historic things that I mentioned. So it broke my heart that was a reality in schools where kids were going through their day like nothing major was going on. Meanwhile, people across the country are bawling their eyes out while this girl's reading poetry.
Me and Amanda Gorman, thank you so much.
But this is not just, this helps to illustrate the problem, which is that social studies is under attack. everywhere. And it is criticized because of the connection to politics.
But I don't know how much longer you can be an educator and not talk about politics. I just don't get it. I don't know how. And same with economics. I have a real hard time that we don't talk about more economics in school.
Yeah.
Kids graduate high school never knowing how to open a bank account. That's a real problem.
Right.
The fact that, like, the first time I see a mortgage statement in my lifetime is when I'm actually filling one out.
Yeah.
We should know about these things. That's a huge piece of your lifetime.
I know. And I don't mean to, like, every subject feels like they don't get due diligence, but there are study after study after study that shows that our subject gets the least diligence. So not only is that a problem, there's also studies coming out that show that students learn literacy better in social studies classes.
Absolutely.
Because there's a content connection to what they're reading.
It's storytelling.
It's storytelling.
Imagery. It's easy to grasp a hold of. And it's the same thing with English. It's like, okay, well, there's a story here. I can grasp onto it. There's a time period. Great. Why not correlate your English and your history classes so that it's consistent through and through?
Right. There's a million things that could be done, but what's happening is that, and I just found out that the elementary school where I teach is not teaching social studies or science in remote learning right now. And apparently that's okay, that we're just going to cut 2 of the 4 core subjects from the curriculum because we're remote.
If I was a parent in that community, I have a real problem.
We're homeschooling now. Like, that's what I'd be saying.
If not, I wouldn't be paying my taxes to the local community schools.
Right.
I mean, I'm paying for an education that I think that my child is receiving in the U.S.
Right.
We live here in the United States of America.
But not just we, the parents, like we, the citizens.
Yeah.
I live in this town, and I want to make sure that every kid in this town is getting an adequate education so that we don't have town-wide issues.
Hysteria when they don't understand science. And they can't figure out how to wear a mask.
Because it got cut because of the pandemic. So it's not just a social studies issue. It's also a women's rights issue, because when you don't teach current events in school, and women have, because of all the other reasons we've outlined on this podcast, women have been cut out of history for all of those reasons. Mm-hmm. The current events are where women are leading and dominating and being badass. Think about the last few elections. We had Sarah Palin, VP to candidate, nominee to John McCain, running against Barack Obama. Then you've got Hillary Clinton, right, running for president for the first time. Now you've got Kamala Harris in a Democratic field of many badass women. Elizabeth Warren, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, so many.
Like the
Amy Klobuchar, like so many.
Who, by the way, did an incredible job at the inauguration. And these are names that American children should be learning, because women aren't represented in the history class, so we need to show the current events. And
it breaks down to representation matters. It's the same thing for any place in life. If you don't see it, you don't know it. And if you don't talk about it, you don't learn it. And it's prevalent in not only history classes, but so many others. And this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to combat everything else.
Right. This particular inauguration was so beautiful in the context of the attack at the Capitol.
I mean,
and all the work that they did to make this a peaceful transfer of power. Seeing George W. Bush there, seeing
all the former presidents,
Mike Pence there, seeing these all of the Supreme Court nominees that Trump put in.
Yep.
All of them
attended.
Were there. And that is so important for Americans to see, for our students to understand that it's going to be okay, that our democracy is going to go on. It literally was
the deep breath that I think we all needed, watching that ceremony, watching those speeches, watching the transfer.
Watching a conservative Supreme Court justice,
oh my gosh,
Chief Justice, swear in Biden, and he thinks it's okay. Like, he's not swearing him in.
I'm sorry, but Mike Pence showing up.
Mike Pence.
I mean, let's just talk about him for. We don't agree with most of his politics.
No.
Most of them are against
Women.
female rights. So I'm not for Mike Pence, but you do your job. You're hired by the people you serve.
Yeah.
And the people that chose to put you in office are still believing in you, and you showed up.
Yeah. It was funny, my students were asking me, when was the last time a president hasn't attended
It's happened.
the inauguration? And literally, Andrew Johnson. Oh my God. Like, that's how far back this goes. Like, is there precedent?
Wait, what year is Andrew Johnson?
So he is Lincoln's VP.
Yeah.
So he was the first president to be impeached in American history.
Yep.
And he was a little bitter. He was
Rightfully so.
They picked him to be Lincoln's running mate because he was a little bit more conservative and less radical than Lincoln was. And so...
they basically set him up for failure.
Yeah, the radical Republicans from New England basically, like, ripped him a new one when he became president, tried to impeach him. They impeached him in the House, not the Senate, that kind of thing. And so he didn't attend. But I think that there has been in the last 4 years this feeling of instability in our democracy.
Absolutely.
And polls are showing that people are not convinced that democracy is always the solution.
Yep.
And rather, that's not a majority opinion, but that is a growing opinion, growing minority opinion. And I think that it was really important to watch Wednesday's events. And
I would agree. And you're missing out on a major national event that millions of people
and you're denying,
worked really hard to make happen.
And you're denying women's history in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Right.
Kamala. It's like Pamela.
Yeah. So let's take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
For lesson plan ideas and how to teach women's history, go to our website, www.remedialherstory.com. You can also follow us on Instagram or Facebook. If you think what we're doing is needed, please consider joining our Patreon community. Through Patreon, you can sponsor a podcast with a small donation. Patrons get access to behind-the-scenes information, gear, and bonus episodes. Patreon allows you, the listener, to ensure that the shows you love continue. This episode is sponsored by our patrons, Kent and Jamie Heckel from Ohio, Leah Tanger from Connecticut, Sarah Reardon from New Hampshire, Barbara Tisler from New York, Mark Breyer from wherever his van has wandered, Jeffrey Eckert and Brooke Neva Sullivan from right here next to me. Thank you so much for your contributions to this podcast. You make it possible. So let's talk Kamala. Mm-hmm. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So, who is Kamala Harris? Why do we like her? Is she amazing? How do we fit her in the classroom?
So she is amazing and she is historic, but she is controversial. And there's a lot of things that are worth looking into about her because as amazing as this historic first is, she's not...
she's not the Democrat that everyone thinks she is.
Yeah. So, let's go way back. So she is the first person of color that was elected to the district attorney's office in San Francisco. And
she's born in California, correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Her parents are both immigrants. One was from Jamaica, one was from India, and they met during the Civil Rights Movement. And what's really cool they did get divorced, but what's really interesting about their story is just the context of her life, that she is going to protests with her parents in Berkeley, California,
my gosh,
where it's happening,
of protests.
Yeah. So just her life story is so cool in that sense. And it also helps connect. I mean, we just had Martin Luther King Day. It helps connect these ideas that that is the context he is the time that she is growing up in. This is not a distant past.
I think many of us can envision what Berkeley, California was like in 60s and 70s of just the sit-ins and the people and the radicals. And it basically was epicenter of some really big
college
movements.
campuses around the country.
I mean,
are the epicenter because you have these
ideals clashing.
You have these kids who are thinking intellectually, thinking critically.
Well, they're also being asked to fight in a war that they don't know about.
Yeah, that the government cannot explain to them.
Yep.
And so yeah, I mean it's incredible this time that she is growing up in, and she experienced racism firsthand. There was a little white girl who told her that she wasn't allowed to play with her because she was black. And so...
Can you imagine what that feels like?
I can't even imagine.
Like, aren't we friends? Oh, yeah, we can be friends, but you're black.
Yeah. I was, like, treated meanly in elementary school.
You'll never know what it's
there's
like.
There's nothing that can compare to it being an immutable characteristic, you know?
I feel like I can't change the color of my skin.
Nope.
It's not part of my character.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's brutal.
So, so she becomes the first person of color elected to the district attorney's office in San Francisco. And in California at the time, there was the controversial 3 strikes law. Are you familiar with that law?
So I watched the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
And talks a lot about this. I didn't realize how discriminatory it was until I saw that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that documentary is very worth watching because it definitely exposes you to a lot of things. There are some good criticisms of it that are also worth exploring. Yeah. But the 3 strikes rule basically in California mandated that if somebody commits 3 felonies, the 3rd conviction is a life sentence in prison,
which
is
too aggressive.
Was
for
very
a lot of people.
Very aggressive and you have to keep... So I think we all could agree, somebody who's committing felonies, that's not great, but you have to remember what kinds of laws are defined as felonies and what type... And so a lot of drug cases are...
And who's in power, mostly white people.
Yep.
Who is affected by drugs in their community, mostly black people or people of color. It's a real problem.
Right.
And it's not okay. And
so this is a controversial...
not a good time.
Yeah. So this is a really controversial law, which she was not responsible for the law. So she, as assistant district attorney, encouraged the police to not arrest people unless it was violent, so that
they wouldn't get a felony charge.
They wouldn't get these felony charges. To try to mediate this controversial law. Yeah. Because it was such a blatant civil rights issue. She negotiated that when she became district attorney, she negotiated that those people would receive instead a high school diploma and a job instead of incarceration. So she tried to make this more of a growth thing. So I think that that's a really great piece of how she tried to operate within the bounds of her job and the law, but try to do the right thing for these people. Unfortunately for her, when she was district attorney, a police officer was shot. He went into a building and was shot dead by, in a routine check. And the funeral was massive. It became this hot button event. People, tons of people are attending this funeral because here's a cop being shot by one of these felons that should have been
maybe incarcerated.
And she was called out directly by Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, who basically was the district attorney needs to step up her game. And what people wanted was they wanted that guy to get the death penalty. And Kamala Harris was anti-death penalty. And to her credit, and I don't know, to her credit, she held her ground among incredible public pressure to give this guy the death penalty, and she did not. But many people, including Dianne Feinstein, were like, you should do that. And she called her out. Diane Feinstein called her out publicly at this guy's funeral, which
I imagine
is
a lot of
incredible.
people do when police officers are murdered or things happen to them in that way. But you have to do your justice.
Yeah.
You have to be impartial. You have to look at the evidence. You have to determine what is best.
And also systems, you know.
Yeah, like,
you
and
have to
what is...
remember systems. Like, why is this guy shooting a cop? What's his story? You know.
What's his story? And also, why is that cop in that circumstance in the first place? What's a routine checkup on a building that it's all the things. It's like you have to look at every angle, and it's awful that a life was lost. Let's not put that down, but it's also you have a lot of angles to look at.
Yeah.
That's your job.
Yeah.
You're justice. You're not jury.
Yeah. So she also passed a law that criminalized, this was a really big one and had a little different than the 3 strikes rule. There was a truancy issue. And this is an issue that I see, I mean, oftentimes if you did a correlation in student grades and attendance, they're the same. You know, it's a very close correlation.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because our soccer coach in college was like, show up to every class, you'll more than likely get a B. I was like,
yeah,
done.
And sit in the front row.
Yeah, sit in the front row, introduce yourself.
Tell the professor your name.
Tell the professor your name, and you'll get a B.
Yep.
And I was like, that's it? He was like, that's it.
Just show up,
Show
kids.
up. Show up, show your face, participate in class, you'll get a B. And I was like, done and done. That sounds good.
To try to address this issue, she tried to tackle it through the law because you're not allowed to miss school. Like the school outlines some sort of attendance policy, and
you have to adhere to that.
You have to adhere to it. It's the law of the land, right? It's not just like a school, like it's the law. And my husband in his job, you know, he literally has had to go into kids' houses and be like, you must come to school today. And like he was telling me this one story about a kid who was hiding in his closet from him, and Jeff had to go in and pull the kid out of a closet and take him to school.
No.
Yeah. Like, so truancy is a serious issue. It impacts, the hardest hit families, usually with like, poverty is a factor.
Oh, sure.
All those sorts of things. So how do you deal with truancy? I mean, this is a question that educators ask themselves all the time.
I imagine.
And because it's like, I have great kids in my class. If they would show up, they would pass. But like, they don't show up, so I don't know what to tell them, you know? You're missing 17 assignments because, you missed 17 days of school, you know? Like, Shocker. So Kamala Harris passed a law that tried to criminalize parents for child truancy.
Ooh.
So
risky.
If your kids don't show up to school, you are now a criminal.
I mean, okay. It's a way to go about it, I guess.
So it was obviously controversial because parents
I imagine
are like
that's exactly what I'm thinking about is like our town was a farming town.
Yeah.
Kids worked on the farm in the morning before school. I milked cows
I know you told me
on a
that.
couple
That's
of
incredible.
farms before school. So for me, I'm thinking about I used to race from the farm to get to school for the first bell at 7:15.
Yeah.
And if I didn't make it, I would be listed as a tardy. And it was like, actually, I was working from 5 a.m. till now.
Right.
And I just got here.
Right.
And a lot of kids would be that way. And so
Right.
it's like, you don't know someone's family circumstance when... And I worked as a choice. There's a lot of kids that didn't.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really tricky line to walk because work, in high school, work is a really big thing that pulls kids away from academic obligations. And I come from a upper middle class background, and so for me, that is not what these 4 years are for.
Yeah, your job is school.
Your job is school. Your job is, these things. But also, I frame it as like a civil rights issue because these are the only 4 years where school will be free for you. So
good point.
People need to take advantage of it because teenagers don't make a lot of money when they work.
No.
And so when parents say that their kid has to work for stuff, that is really challenging for me to understand. It's like, okay, like I literally broke it down with a student who was like, I have to work my job. And so I asked her, I was like, okay, how much money do you make at this job? She was like, well, I work 2 hours a day after school and I make like, I forget what she made at the time, like $8 an hour, maybe. And so I like added up. I was like, okay, so over the course of this semester, this is how much money you are going to make.
Yeah.
If you get an A in my class, it will qualify you for this scholarship at the school that you want to go for. Like the difference in how much money she was going to make this semester versus the college that she wanted to go to.
But that's like short term versus
short term, long term.
And that's really hard for kids in poverty. It's really hard for families in poverty.
I'm not joking. It was like $20,000 difference, and I was just like, "Oh my god!"
But someone makes the analogy all the time. It's like you give someone in poverty $20, or you give someone who isn't in poverty $20. I guarantee you the $20 are gonna be gone with someone in poverty because they don't have the luxury of savings.
Correct.
Or thinking long term. It's very day to day, and it is really hard for parents to make the minimum, and I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about giving kids the minimum.
Right.
Safety, security.
Yeah.
Food.
Yep.
We have a real hard time in our local communities doing that.
Getting those basics. Yeah. And kids oftentimes mediate the gap with their pay.
Which is what their parents did when they were teenagers. And it's a generational thing.
Right. Right. And so the challenge, though, as a parent is understanding the short-term getting through, and your child still has, after they leave here and leave your house, they still have 80 years to live.
Oh, sure.
So how...
That's just not the view they have. That's not the lens they look through.
Yeah.
Which
but
is
it's
really
crazy
hard.
because like these small things are the financial setup to the rest of their life.
Absolutely. You're getting the foundation of how they're going to be successful forever.
Yeah. So bringing it back to Kamala Harris, criminalizing parents for this doesn't make sense because obviously these parents are already dealing with a lot of things. And this is something that that stance is something that she has since apologized for. Which is interesting. I do appreciate when politicians can recognize failures and move forward.
I know. I think Biden came up with a couple that he was like, I was wrong at the time.
So let's flash forward to now. So she became senator for California, and had a very fiery few years as senator. So she's senator of California. She gives up that position she holds that position while she's campaigning for president. So she actually ran against Biden. And she calls Biden out in the debates on his opposition to busing laws in the past. So some they were going through his record. And what's really hard when you've been a politician for a long time.
For 80 years.
40, half that, but yeah, it's still a long time. So you have a very long record. And so there's this really powerful debate early on where she basically calls him out and she tells the story of herself being on a bus.
Yes.
And it was so incredible. So she runs against him. Her campaign kind of falls flat. Political scientists sort of look at in the Democratic Party, you've got this spectrum of, moderate to very liberal progressives, and
Biden was pretty flat at the beginning.
Yeah,
he basically New Hampshire, Iowa, like he was
not doing.
He should have dropped out.
Yeah,
he stuck in it.
Yeah.
Got North Carolina, Atlanta. Like he went in for the southern states that held him tight.
Yeah.
That didn't hold Kamala and Pete Buttigieg, who was like who did Mayor great Pete was like
in the early contest.
Exactly, but like Mayor Pete did really well in New Hampshire, did really well in Iowa, and then like came through, and it's just like it's surprising the change and the swift change.
Yeah, when
they were like, you're not our pick, Kamala and Pete.
Yeah.
And Amy Klobuchar at that time, too.
Yeah.
And,
Yang.
Well, who was senator from Massachusetts?
Oh, Warren, Elizabeth
Warren. She was still in it at that point. And they were like, yeah, we're going with Biden.
Right. Well, what's hard, so for her presidential campaign, she's, you've got the Bernies and the Elizabeth Warrens on the pretty progressive side.
Right.
And then you've got the Amy Klobuchars sort of moderate in the middle with Kamala Harris. And she tries to walk the line between progressive and moderate, and she ends up kind of not appealing to either one. Yeah. And I think, Biden was trying really hard to pull in that progressive wing, but it's hard. There were a lot of really big names like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren
who were riding the progressive wave.
You can't compete in that lane, so you got to find your own. And
then he made the statement, I will choose a person of color as my running mate.
And to Amy Klobuchar's credit, because Amy
Klobuchar stepped down.
She said that it should be a woman of color, and she pushed him in that direction, which I thought was incredible.
And that's why she was at the inauguration too.
Yeah, leading it. Yeah,
I mean,
she's incredible.
She's when you watch Amy Klobuchar's speeches and what her rhetoric is and all the things that she does, it's like, damn, girl.
Yeah.
It should be you and Kamala. It should have been you and Kamala, going forward, being the women in power. But we're in America, and we have to play to the game that we're playing.
Yeah.
And so Biden goes.
Yeah, and Biden has run for president many times. He is a deserving candidate, lots of experience. And I also think that I'm very excited about, whether it was him or Trump, the history making of having an older president. I hate that age is a conversation about whether somebody can do a job.
Be qualified, yeah. They do over 45.
Yeah. I mean,
I do love that Mayor Pete is on the cabinet. It's making me very excited about the future for him.
The diverse cabinet is history making because it is
first trans, first openly gay, first
there's a lot of gender diversity in the cabinet, so it is the most gender diverse cabinet in American history. Mm-hmm. It is not the most racially diverse cabinet in American history, but there are more Latino and indigenous people in the cabinet than ever in American history.
I wonder if there's more openly gay.
Oh, probably, but I don't know that. And it's also hard, openly would be the key word there. Because
that's what I'm thinking is I'm imagining there's more gay cabinets, but I'm thinking of the current that are out, proud, loud.
Yeah.
And they're in the cabinet.
Yeah.
Which is really impressive. And the indigenous. I am really excited about this cabinet.
Me too. I'm excited about the diversity, and I'm excited about that being a trend for all presidents to have in the future, just representing
let's hope
representing this diverse nation.
It should represent all Americans, just have voices from every corner of the US. We're a huge country.
Yeah,
we have tons of diversity.
Yeah
just bring it all together. I don't want to see just one voice. I want to see everyone's voice.
Yeah. So for the lesson plan that I've put up this week, it is a framework for analyzing the inaugural poet who read.
Amanda Gorman.
Yes, and it's just such a special thing. And we have a lot of English teachers that follow us as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is an opportunity for them to bring a little something into their class.
Well, and if any parents listen, she has an incredible PBS episode about racial diversity and how to talk to your kids, and Amanda Gorman leads it, and it's really, really awesome.
That's awesome. She also has a TED Talk, which we have up on our website, which you can check out. And this is, we have not seen the end of Kamala Harris, and I'm sure we'll have a lesson plan focused on her time as vice president soon. I'm excited to talk in the coming week about another vice presidential candidate that was considered before the woman of color rule was thrown out there. And that is the senator from New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan, who will be coming on our podcast next week.
I'm so excited.
So, big doings. We're excited to talk with Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire about all the historic women's history that we are witnessing. But Maggie Hassan herself is a history-making woman, and we're excited to talk about her.
Absolutely.
So,
yay. See you next week. I'm Brooke Sullivan.
I'm Kelsie Eckert.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.